Hello, this is Andy Nicol again, the course tutor for the Perfectly Spoken Advanced course. And in this lesson, which is lesson 34 in the series, we are looking at the vocabulary of war and warfare. Obviously, we're living in very troubled times with wars across the world. This is a level C1 lesson, as always, and is roughly IELTS 7.5. Okay, so what are we going to look at? Well, we're going to look at the following areas. First of all, weaponry itself throughout the ages, not just modern weapons, but from the Middle Ages and so on. Verbs related to warfare, and nouns related to warfare. So first of all, we'll have a look at some weaponry. We're going to see a series of images like this one, and just identify what weapon or so on is being depicted in the picture. Okay, so here's the first one. We've got missile, tank, machine gun, battleship, bow and arrow, helmet, sword, shield, cannon, and spear. So which of these is being depicted in the picture? And this, of course, is a battleship. Battleship. Very famous in history, of course. We have the Bismarck, for example, the German battleship that was sank in the Second World War, I believe. Okay, next one. Here's an item from medieval and also ancient warfare. This is actually one belonging to a Viking. So which item is being depicted here? The protective headgear is a helmet. A helmet. So next one. Okay, these were first used in the First World War during the trench warfare, and gave the British, I think at first, an advantage. And these, of course, are tanks. Tanks. This is a tank, plural tanks. Next one. Okay, a more basic form of weaponry, which you either use to throw at your opponent, or you can hold it in your hands. And this is, of course, a spear. Spear. Next one. Okay, another form of protection, like the helmet. And this is also, again, from medieval times, although obviously they existed in ancient times in different forms. You have round ones and so on. This is a shield. A shield. Some of you may be familiar with Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Next one. This is a type of rocket that you fire at your opponents. They can be, some of them can be intercontinental. They can travel from one continent to another, or more short-range ones. This is a missile. A missile. Next one. Very famous MK-47 or Kalashnikov, famous types of these. These are the machine gun. The machine gun. Here's the next one. Okay, and this is, again, was first appeared in ancient times, but has been used in medieval warfare. I think it was possibly the Indians or the Chinese that used them first. And this is a cannon, a cannon. The next one, we've got two items here, the thing that you pull and the thing that you fire. What you pull like this is the bow, and what you fire is the arrow. So it's bow and arrow. And the last one is obviously a sword. Notice in the pronunciation, the W is silent. Sword, sword. Okay, let's have a look now at some other vocabulary related to warfare, people and war. So I want you to match the people or the organization with the definition. So, there were a high number of casualties as a result of the bombing raids. Casualties. Which of the definitions, A, B, C, D, E, or F, matches the word casualties? So people who are forced to leave a country due to war, people who are injured or killed in warfare, people who are not competent, or members of the armed forces, a group of people who've been trained to fight or protect others, the armed forces of the sea, or the people who remain alive after hostilities have ended. Well, casualties are B, people who are injured or killed in a conflict. Next one, millions of refugees have been fleeing the conflict and seeking asylum. Seeking asylum is to get another country to agree to protect you, and you can stay there because you can't go back to your own country. And the answer is A, people who are forced to leave a country as a result of war or fear of persecution, refugees. At the moment, there's a big refugee crisis in Europe, people fleeing conflicts in places like Syria, Afghanistan, and so on. The next one, the Navy has been sent to the troubled region, including an aircraft carrier, battleships, and frigates. Well, we've seen battleships, or a battleship before. And the Navy, of course, is the armed forces on the sea. Survivors told of the horror that they witnessed during the occupation. Survivors. Pause the recording if you need a bit of time. And of course, survivors are F, the people who remain alive after hostilities, as opposed to the casualties, which includes those who died. But survivors are people who remain alive. The bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War was the first time that civilians were specifically targeted during a war. Civilians. This is actually true. The Germans bombed the small Basque town of Guernica, which was significant to the Basque people. It was an important site for them. And famously, Pablo Picasso painted his painting, which I think hangs in the Prado in Madrid. I'm not sure, they might have moved it. But anyway, so they actually dropped bombs on civilians for the first time. Yes, civilians are C, people who are not competent, not members of the armed forces. Civilians. 3 syllables, stress on the second syllable. Civilians. Next one, UN peacekeeping forces have been deployed in the war-torn region. Well, of course, forces is D, group of people who've been trained to fight or protect others. You can have peacekeeping forces, armed forces, security forces, etc. It collocates with lots of different words. Okay, moving on. Air Force fighter jets have been scrambled to intercept the enemy aircraft. Scrambled means when they call on the planes to take off and to, for example, in this case, intercept the enemy aircraft. So a scramble is when all the pilots rush to the aircraft and they take off. So Air Force is A person of rank in charge of a group of soldiers. B, prisoners of war. C, people who shoot other soldiers from a concealed position. The armed forces of the air. D, a friendly country you've agreed to help in time of war. E, or people who have been injured in conflict. And the answer is, of course, D, the armed forces in the air. Famously, the first Air Force was, I believe, the Royal Air Force of the UK, and they fought in the First World War with very basic propeller planes. Nowadays, obviously, they are very sophisticated, high-tech fighter jets and so on. Like stealth fighters, which are not even detectable by radar and so on. Okay, hospitals have been under strain due to the high number of wounded from the bombing raid. Well, the wounded are people who have been injured in conflict. F. The officer gave the order for the soldiers under his command to retreat. An officer is A, a person of rank in charge of a group of soldiers. You can have majors, colonels, lieutenants, etc. These are all officers. During the Battle of Stalingrad, Russian snipers shot large numbers of German soldiers laying siege to the city. Stalingrad was a turning point in the Second World War, when the Germans were defeated by the Russians and the Russian winter as well, and had to retreat at great cost in terms of German soldiers and so on. And the answer is, well, a sniper is C, people who shoot other soldiers from a concealed position. There's a film, I think, called Enemy at the Gate, where you can see what happened during the Battle of Stalingrad, and you can also see snipers in this film. A number of POWs were held in the internment camp. Of course, is B, prisoners of war, combatants captured in prison during a conflict. Got a Spanish spell check on my computer, which is written conflicto. No, conflict, it should say. There's no O. Prisoners of war, POWs. Members of NATO are obliged to come to the aid of an ally if they are ever attacked by a foreign power. Well, this is, of course, E, a friendly country you have agreed to help in time of war, an ally. And now we're going to look at some incidents and events. So you can see the siege of Istanbul, I believe, in the picture. Anyway, during the First World War, there were a number of unofficial ceasefires called at Christmas, and enemy soldiers swapped gifts on the front. This actually happened 1914, I think, near the beginning of the war. It's been going on for a few months. And Christmas came and soldiers decided to lay down their arms and to go over and greet the other soldiers and so on and so forth. So ceasefire is C, when armies agree to end hostilities temporarily. Ceasefire. Revolution in Russia in 1917 toppled the Tsar and brought an end to fighting on the Eastern Front. Revolution, famously in Russia in 1917, with Lenin and Trotsky and all these people. F, the overthrow or attempted overthrow of a country's rulers by a mass of people. Revolution. Of course, we had the French Revolution in 1789 and so on. Lots of revolutions throughout history. Russia being one of the most famous. Okay, sailors at Spithead and the Nore, these were two ports in England, started a mutiny against their officers due to the horrendous conditions and harsh punishments. This took place during the Napoleonic War, and the sailors refused to getting their ships to fight, etc., because they had been treated so badly. So a mutiny is D, when members of the armed forces turn against their officers. You also have mutinies in the army and so on in the First World War as well. In 1972, General Augusto Pinochet led the coup which overthrew the elected president of Chile, Salvador Allende. And it's A, sudden illegal change of government, usually involving sections of the armed forces. It's actually a French word, coup, comes from coup d'etat. Sometimes you'll actually see people use the word coup d'etat. We don't have our own English word for it. It's the French word coup. In the American Civil War, the northern states eventually defeated the southern rebels due to their superior industrial capabilities. Civil war is E, a war between two or more groups within the same country. We had the English Civil War, where the Oliver Cromwell fought the army of the king. The Spanish Civil War, of course, this in the 20th century, where Franco came to power against the Republicans, and so on. Civil war. Currently, actually, there are civil wars taking place in parts of the world, in Ethiopia, and so on. At the end of the First World War, a harsh treaty was signed at Versailles, which allowed Germany to make Germany to make considerable reparations. They had to pay back lots of money, hand over land, etc. And the answer is B, a formal agreement between countries, or in this case at the end of the war, not necessarily. The European Union, for example, is the Treaty of Rome, which obviously didn't take place during war or anything. Okay. So now we're going to look at verbs finally. And you've got the following verbs: to besiege, to bombard, to break out, to declare, to defeat, to execute, fraternize, loot, release, retreat, storm, and topple. The first one, after the bombing, people started to blank all the shops, taking electrical goods, clothes, medicine, anything they could lay their hands on. Yes, usually in times of a war or natural disaster, people seize the opportunity to get things they otherwise can't because the police and everything are busy or have collapsed in the war. Sometimes the police disbands and so on. The answer is loot. To loot means to remove things, to steal in large groups of people, stealing from shops and so on. To loot. Number 2. During the ceasefire, the soldiers began to something with the enemy, exchanging gifts and even playing football. We talked about the ceasefire during the First World War in the previous section. So when you go up and you exchange gifts and you befriend and talk to the enemy, the verb is to fraternize. Fraternize. Once you get the word fraternal as well. Number 3. It's likely that war will something between the two countries over this borders dispute. It means that war will start suddenly. Again, this is something that happens quite often in particularly in places like Africa and so on. The border between, for example, Somalia and Ethiopia and Djibouti and these places, they're constant fighting. So it's likely that war will break out, will start suddenly, break out. Number 4, the former president was something in a coup earlier this year and later something by firing squad. So obviously this is in the past, and also the first one is a passive, so we need the participle of the verb, so you have to change the verb. So the president was overthrown or toppled in a coup earlier this year. You could also say overthrown. And later, He was shot by firing squad. He was executed by firing squad. Firing squad is a line of people with guns and shot him. Okay, number 5. The enemy troops something the city with mortars and tanks. Mortars are like small kind of cannon-like guns and that fire rockets or bombs or missiles. And the answer is bombarded. To bombard means to fire bombs, missiles at a place again and again. The enemy troops bombarded the city with mortars and tanks. Okay, a few more now. After something the town for several months, the attackers something and finally captured it. So if you encircle a town to try to capture it, as in the picture earlier on of Istanbul, this is called a siege, and the verb is to besiege, and in this case it's besieging. It's the subject of the sentence. Besieging the town for several months, the attackers stormed and finally captured it. To storm means to attack a town or a city suddenly and take and capture it, or try to capture it. To storm. You storm a building, you storm a town. Number 7. War was something in September of 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, or was declared. You declare war on your enemy. Number 8. They were eventually something and obliged to sign a peace treaty. They were eventually defeated. They lost, so they were defeated, as opposed to win. And then, number 9, Napoleon was forced to something from Russia and abandoned his campaign due to the harsh Russian winter. So he had to give up and go back. So he was forced to retreat. To retreat was to go back in the opposite direction, as opposed to advance. You advance or you retreat. And the last one on this, the decision to something the prisoners was taking in exchange for the return of our own captured troops. Well, what you do with prisoners when you set them free is release. Release prisoners, you set them free. Okay, so that's all for this lesson. Next lesson is lesson 35, which is another review lesson. Review of lessons 31 to 34. Obviously, it will be me again. And in this lesson, we'll look again at the grammar of verb patterns, which we looked at in lessons 31 and 33. Verbs plus gerund, plus infinitive without to, transitive and intransitive verbs, and so on. We'll look at the vocabulary of the world of work, which we looked at in lesson 32. And today's lesson, war and warfare, as well. Okay, I hope that you found this lesson useful. Obviously, war and conflict, unfortunately, is a feature of life at the moment, and it's important that obviously we know the vocabulary to be able to discuss it and talk about it. Okay, I look forward to you tuning into the next broadcast, and I'll speak to you then. Bye-bye for now.